Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome. We're very glad that you could join us today. My name is Erica Blankart, Senior Public Affairs Manager and Head of Sustainability at Invest Europe, and I will be your host for today's session, Can AI be Sustainable? This is the third session in our AI webinar series, and this afternoon we're focusing on a crucial topic, the sustainability considerations and broader implications of AI use. From carbon emissions and human rights to good governance, we will explore how we can harness AI in a way that is both responsible and sustainable. This series is part of our ongoing efforts at Invest Europe to better understand the impact of emerging technologies on our industry and to promote thoughtful, forward-looking approaches to innovation and sustainability. As AI becomes more embedded in business and investment decision-making, it's essential to reflect on its wider implications, not just in terms of efficiency and productivity, but also ethics, accountability, and environmental impact. Here's what we will be covering today. The environmental footprint of AI systems, including energy use, emissions, and water consumption. Human rights implications related to AI deployment and decision-making. Governance frameworks and emerging rules shaping the ethical use of AI. We will wrap up with a dedicated Q&A session, so please bring your questions and ideas. We would love to hear from you. Throughout the webinar, feel free to use the chat box to share comments or reflections. Your engagement helps make these sessions dynamic and insightful for everyone. Now, let's turn to our speakers. We are honored to be joined by an excellent panel of experts. First up, we have Alaric Marsden, Partner EMEA Corporate Sustainability and Climate Change at ERM. Alaric will kick us off with the environmental implications of AI use. He'll be focusing mainly on the climate, carbon, and water challenges, but also highlighting some of the investment upsides. Next, we're pleased to welcome Desiree Abrahams, Specialist in Responsible Business Practices, Human and Environmental Rights at ERM. With 20 years of experience of examining businesses' impacts on human rights and the environment, she brings deep expertise in this topic. We're also delighted to be joined by David Wakeling from A&O Sherman. David is Global Head of the firm's AI Advisory Practice and Markets Innovation Group, a group of lawyers, developers, and technologists focused on the creation of innovative solutions that enable clients to meet large-scale legal and regulatory challenges. David is regarded as one of the leading AI lawyers in the world. And last, but certainly not least, Abdelhai Toudma, EY Luxembourg Technology Consulting Partner. Abdelhai has over 25 years of international experience in the banking, finance, insurance, telecom, and legal industries. It's a real pleasure to have all of you with us this afternoon. Thank you very much for generously sharing your time and expertise. To everyone else tuning in, a very quick housekeeping note. Please make sure your microphone is muted to help us avoid any background noise during the session. With that, let's get started. Alaric, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks Erica, and lovely to see you all. I'm just going to share my screen and we'll just check that's working all right. I'm not an AI chatbot, so I'm having to do this manually. Okay, has that come through okay?
Perfect, thank you, Alaric.
Wonderful, thanks, Erica. So my name's Alaric, great to meet you all. I work for ERM, so we are a global sustainability consulting firm. We're about 8,000 people and we've been around since the 1970s. My role is primarily advising private markets clients, PE, infrastructure investors, and look, the AI topic comes up a lot. And really the question that I'm going to pose to us all here, and I'd love to see your comments here in the chat, is AI from a sustainability standpoint hero or villain? So there's a lot of kind of impacts from a negative standpoint, but there's also a lot of opportunities here, and from an investor standpoint, lots of innovation, lots of new investment that is going into this space as well. Okay, So just from a structure standpoint, as Erica said, I'm going to talk about the energy and also climate side, the water side, which is often forgotten about, materials and circular economy. So those are the sort of three impacts. And then I'm going to talk about some of the upsides. So let's jump into it. Just move my slides down. So if we just look at a classic ChatGPT search, it's interesting, some of the messages that sort of come back here. So we've asked it a carbon question here, and you can see there's a 0.2 to 0.6 grams of CO2 impact per query, which doesn't seem like that much. But then when you start to scale that up in terms of numbers of searches, use of generative AI, deep thinking, the level of carbon, power, and also water usage really goes up. I think the other point to make here is that it's an electricity story. So a lot of the sustainability impacts comes from power usage, which we'll talk about. And a lot of that power usage comes from data centers. So a lot of this story, not exclusively, but a lot of the story is around data centers. So that's just a few key highlights which we will talk through. So energy. In a sense, we know well the gold rush of some time back. This is a power rush. There is an inordinately fast rising need for power from AI and from AI-led data centers. So that's the kind of headline. And depending on the carbon intensity of the grids which power the data centers, there is a varying by jurisdiction climate impact. So that's the sort of first point. In terms of the power usage, what's really interesting pre-AI is that the data center power usage, and I just to check my notes here, was about 1.5% global power consumption, and that was flat for quite some time. Then AI comes along, and that power usage starts to increase. And the reason that it's flat was that the efficiencies of data centers, as they got more and more modern, was able to counteract the increase in the number of data centers. So it was about 1.5% global power consumption for data centers. Now, if we start to zoom in on just a single data center, right? So a single data center, a conventional one, would typically use, let's say, between 10 and 25 megawatts. If we turn that data center into an AI-enabled data center, we're looking at, up between 4 and 10 times greater power consumption. So that's up to 100 megawatts. And when we're talking about data centers and the Stargate UAE data center AI, that's 5 gigawatts. So you start to get a sense as to the volume of power increase. That's the real story here. And it's not just the number of data centers, it's their bigger data centers and they're much more powerful. Okay, so in Europe today, data centers, using around about 70 terawatt hours. With the impact of AI, we're looking at that is increasing by about 1.5 times to 115 terawatt hours. But then you look at the global picture, it's about a 4x increase from power consumption from data centers now to nearly 1,700. So that's a 4x increase. So what that does is it takes the 1.5% electricity consumption from data centers to about 4.4%. That starts to get pretty material. Okay. Then the question is, where does that power come from? So there's sort of 3 or 4 so whats from this. One is that this increase in power demand is driven a lot by the hyperscalers, so Microsoft, Meta, etc., all of whom have very challenging decarbonization targets. and therefore there's a competition for renewable power. So at a time when we're trying to decarbonize the electricity for heat, for vehicles, for buildings, we've now got a new source of competition for renewables. Okay, so that's a real issue. Secondly, grid access. We have a lot of challenges because of this gold rush for power. Getting grid access for new data centers, for AI, is a massive problem. And we're seeing, so just by example, there was a £3.2 billion data center project from Microsoft here in the UK. The grid access from National Grid is not until 2035. So that whole investment is being placed at risk because of grid access. And that also creates a wider sustainability impact, which is the license to operate from the local communities who are having to deal with increased demand for power that affects prices, etc. There's a whole social license to operate a challenge here. Okay. However, the good news for investors is there's a bunch of mitigations here which present in themselves investment opportunities. So there's a huge push, lots of technologies to improve energy efficiency of AI data centers and surrounding infrastructure, battery storage, green software. So there's a lot of mitigation, but that is relatively in its infancy. But again, that's a big investment opportunity. And love to hear in the chat the extent to which any of you are involved in this. Let's jump to let's keep going. So the water story often gets forgotten, and this map here kind of looks a little bit like the air temperature chart for Europe right at the moment. But that temperature really is a allegory for water stress. So the red and the yellow here are areas of Europe where there's significant water stress. And as these data centers are getting bigger, more powerful, using more power, their cooling loads are getting much higher. So these things get hot and there's a lot of cooling needed. And it's not the only technology that is used, but evaporative cooling from water is one of the main technologies. So there's a lot of water needed to cool the data centers. And if you squint your eyes and look at the green dots, you can see some examples of where data centers are due to be located. And as you can see, they're in the red areas, so areas where there is significant water stress. So that is a real sustainability challenge. And in fact, again, a couple of data points for you here. A 1 megawatt data center, we estimate that uses about 25 million liters of water per year. So very significant. The ChatGPT-3, for every 40 or 50 searches, that uses about a half a liter of water, significant here. In Iowa, when they were training the ChatGPT-4 model, just in 1 month, they used 6% of the district water supply. Okay, so you get a sense of the sheer water usage here. Again, from a mitigation standpoint, there are other technologies, refrigerant gases, closed loop systems. There's a lot of innovation going on here. So there's investment opportunities, but this is a real challenge that the industry is working to fix. Let me jump on to circular economy and also sort of waste. So as with any major capital build program, and where there's a lot of redundancy in the technology, so some of the capital kit has got a lifespan in a data center of between 1 and 5 years, you get a sense of the refurbishment and the waste that is potentially going on here. And then you couple that with the fact that for a 2 kilogram computer, for which reads server as well, that's 800 kilos of raw materials. You get a sense again of the raw materials and critical minerals challenge here. And just in the build phase, something like 40% of the emissions from construction is from concrete. And as many of you will know, that in itself is a hard to abate sector, and a really big emitter. And at the end of life, if you've only got 1 to 5 years of lifespan of the assets in the data center site, that's a lot of e-waste, and there's a lot of challenges and reputational issues and cost for those operating these sorts of assets. Okay, but again, a series of mitigation options, and there's a lot of work going on, including from many of our private equity investors who are investing in the sorts of technologies that can help resolve these challenges. Okay, so those are the 3 main kind of environmental challenges, albeit with mitigation options and investment opportunities. Let's just jump into perhaps a bit more of the hero space. Not a day goes by when we, as I think the world's largest sustainability consulting firm, don't get a query about how AI can solve sustainability challenges beyond just the data center world. There's a lot of innovation going on in climate modeling, satellites, helping to locate assets, to increase resilience, and boost adaptation, carbon capture. Where do you kind of locate those facilities? There's a lot of work on precision agriculture. So we've seen a lot of overloading of nitrates. That's caused a lot of water pollution. So really calibrating the level of inputs of agriculture using AI. We see a lot of that, and also in the wider economy where you've got capital assets, energy monitoring, adaptive cooling, and in the renewable space. So AI and the information it unlocks is quite extraordinary, and therefore the 180 megatons of emissions, which is about 0.5% of global carbon emissions, which is attributed just to data centers. If we look at how that may increase, I told that the electricity story previously, that could go up to 1.4%. But if we take a big step back and look at, well, actually, what's the mitigation from AI solutions right across the economy, that's orders of magnitude larger than the impact that it currently has. So there's a significant upside here, way beyond the data center story. And then if I just finish up here, in terms of some of the practical takeaways, look, mitigating those impacts, what I would say to you is really getting a handle on your data, so mapping and quantifying the sustainability impacts on your investments, data centers, but way beyond, and across your portfolios. So really understanding the scope 1, 2, 3, and we do a lot of work on scope 3, for instance. That's one of our biggest growth areas. Then translating that material sustainability impact into financial exposure. So to what extent is that impacting your operating costs? So if you can help make an investment to help a data center reduce its power usage by 20%, that's a massive OPEX upside. But we see a lot of revenue defense plays here as well. So the hyperscalers are saying, hey, we're not going to buy your product anymore unless you can prove to us that you've got a robust decarbonization plan. So actually accessing, protecting, and augmenting revenues, if you're in the hyperscaler value chain, is super important. And then just as you're doing deals, due diligence, and really making sure that the impact of AI and sustainability is really wired into the value stories that you're building for due diligence, and also in the hold period, how it's protecting value. On the opportunity side, look, I've talked a lot about investment opportunities to resolve some of the sustainability impacts. But actually at the GP level, I'm seeing an increasing number of clients using AI to drive value across their portfolio. Again, this is way beyond data centers. So just one example, we had clients with something like 330 portfolio companies, and they were trying to figure out how many of their portcos had exposure to customers with SBTI targets. Now that's a big data challenge, but AI is a magnificent way to really understand what the revenue augmentation or defense play is for their portfolio companies from that customer exposure. I've talked a lot about data centers, and there's a huge amount of innovation, as I said there, and investment opportunities around providing low carbon power, resolving waste heat. For instance, in Germany, you can't build a data center without a waste heat plant. So there's a lot of capital at risk there. And there's wider benefits from sustainability, using AI around innovation across lots of other sectors. And then just sort of last slide here, my main recommendation is really finding the value creation and protection. So what a lot of our clients are doing with and without our help is to run a value diagnostic. So what's the OPEX revenue cost of capital impact of your business from sustainability linked to AI? And this is a diagnostic that we use in terms of understanding where the value could be created or is at risk, and building that into investment grade plans, and then building it into implementation. So it's a really useful kind of discipline in applying a financial value diagnostic to how AI and sustainability impacts value in your portfolio. Erica, that's me done. I will pass back to you. Hopefully that's around a little bit less than 10 minutes. I hope I've gained a little bit of time there.
It's all fine. Thank you very much, Alaric. Desiree, can we come to you to cover the human rights perspective?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Desiree Abrahams, and I'm a Consulting Director on Human Rights for ERM. And so my colleague Alaric did a fine job at explaining the environmental impacts, and my job is to explain the human rights harms associated with AI. So my presentation will be brief. I will quickly touch upon human rights and the corporate responsibility to respect principle, before providing a number of examples of how AI causes human rights harms, taking you through a series of some lawsuits. Then I will finish off with how companies can respond to the challenge before bringing you to some case studies on Microsoft and Sanofi. Okay, so just before I get into some of the meat, I want to contextualize human rights and the corporate responsibility to respect principle. So I'm sure everybody on the call is aware of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which was agreed at the UN in 2011. And this essentially is a normative standard that says that businesses have a distinct corporate responsibility to respect human rights. And the reason I am flashing this up now is that this is why we're talking about AI and human rights. It's down to this specific corporate responsibility principle. And this is very much distinct from the state's duty to protect human rights. So now when we talk about human rights, what does that mean in practice? So I commissioned this image quite a number of years ago and still use it because I think it's great at encapsulating that human rights is an umbrella term. So when we're talking about human rights, we're talking about economic, social, civil, political, consumer protection, privacy. So we're talking about many different human rights. We're talking about over 30. And so we need to consider that when we are thinking about how AI harms human rights. Okay, so for the next few slides, what I want to do is touch upon a number of human rights that AI harms and a number of affected stakeholders. So the reason I'm doing this is that when we're thinking about human rights, we need to get granular. So we can't just talk about stakeholders, we need to say who. So in this case, I'll be focusing on some workers and some contractors. And specifically, I'll be looking at, in this case, the right to not be discriminated. So what we have here is a series of screenshots discussing some lawsuits. Quite recently, actually, Workday There are allegations against Workday for age discrimination. So essentially, Workday uses an AI tool, and there are some allegations about candidates over the years of 40. And then looking at Uber Eats, there was a lawsuit in the UK concerning an Uber Eats courier. This was a case of racial discrimination. Specifically, Uber Eats, they had been using a facial recognition software, and a particular courier, essentially, he just couldn't access the app. So he wasn't able to secure work. Many of you may have heard about Amazon back in 2018. They actually needed to scrap their AI recruiting tool because they found out that it was showing bias against women. And then in my last case here, this is a case out of the US. Now, this is a case that actually touches upon various aspects of discrimination. So in this case, there was a case of gender, culture, and disability. There was a deaf, Indigenous woman who had worked at this company for many years, and she was encouraged to go for promotion. And the AI tool, essentially, she was screened and she was rejected. Now, just moving on, what I want to do here is just to show you that when we're talking about discrimination, I've previously talked about employees and different types of employees who are potentially impacted. But employees are not the only affected stakeholders when it comes to AI. So, for example, here, we have some examples of customers. And in this particular case, African Americans, many cases in the US concerning mortgage applicants, African American mortgage applicants, basically being denied as a result of an AI tool. And also tenants. So again, minorities in the US, at the hands of AI tools, essentially not being able to secure housing. And just lastly here, just to touch upon the various independents and freelancers who are subject to AI, essentially taking their work. Now, I've touched upon discrimination. I want to touch upon two other rights before I close this out. So this is the right to privacy. Of course, we all know that AI, if not responsible, can impact our right to privacy. And what I wanted to show here is that we've got different cases concerning workers. So specifically in that case, we've got the Apple case. But we've also got customers. I'm sure all of us are on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn previously this year, I think it was earlier this year, was accused of private messages to train AI. They had changed their privacy settings, hadn't made it known, and some users of the premium service had filed a lawsuit. And just lastly, for all of us that are parents, I'm sure we look to the future and we wonder what the world of work will be like for our children. And this is really just to touch upon that, AI undoubtedly is going to change the world of work for children, Generation Alpha and future generations. And there was an article just a few weeks ago talking about the Big Four slashing graduate jobs as AI takes on various entry-level work. And this is just to show you that it's not just the world of consulting, but we've got banking, the banking sector, and also tech. So increasingly, we're seeing more industries starting to use AI and reducing their entry-level workforce. So what can companies do to address AI harms? So what we would always encourage is that in addressing AI harms, we would want you to consider integrating AI considerations within your existing ESG and specifically the S, due diligence processes, or if you're actually undertaking human rights due diligence processes, actually integrate AI considerations within that. And there on the left-hand side, I provided the image from the UNGPs and the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprises. And both of these normative standards describe a very clear 6-point process on how to undertake human rights due diligence. And the key thing here is that human rights due diligence is meant to be a continuous exercise, not a one-off exercise. Now, we're quite fortunate within human rights is that 2 weeks ago, we had the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights issue this important report called Artificial Intelligence, Procurement and Deployment. And it essentially says what I've just said, that really when you're looking to consider AI harms, you want to ensure close alignment with existing UNGP's practice. And so what I've done here is I've got the recommendations for businesses, and I have underscored with those golden diamonds where human rights due diligence processes are also in play. So you can see that what we're trying to do is encourage companies to really integrate AI considerations within existing human rights due diligence processes. So what does that mean in practice? Essentially, it means, for example, looking at your human rights policy and ensuring that there's clear and unequivocal language regarding AI involved in the policy. It would mean ensuring that AI-related risks, human rights risks, are considered within your existing human rights risk assessments or impact assessments. It would ensure that, you know, when you're thinking about training, consider the AI considerations within the training. So who specifically within the company now needs to consider AI harms? And are you ensuring that your training provider is aware of this new requirement? I know that the following presenters will touch upon AI governance, so I won't go into that here. But I will like to draw your attention to capacity building. Very important when you're thinking about AI considerations and specifically human rights, and also access to remedy and grievance mechanisms. So now for all the companies that already have existing grievance mechanisms in place, are you thinking about AI harms? And if not, that is definitely next on the agenda for you to consider. So just here, I wanted to present to you the risks, and I've outlined various of legal settlements and costs and regulatory fines and the associated reputational damage. But also there are the upsides. And when we think about AI human rights due diligence, there's definitely an opportunity now. It's very new, it's on the agenda for mainly the tech companies, but we are seeing increasing other companies from other sectors that are starting to consider AI integration within their human rights due diligence approach. And so I want to leave you off with touching upon 2 case studies. So the first one is Microsoft. So I'm sure you won't be surprised that they have started to think about AI and responsible AI from a very long time now. And so what Microsoft has done is quite a comprehensive approach. You know, they've got a responsible AI standard. They have specific AI principles. They've given attention to what that means in practice, how they're going to implement responsible AI. And for a number of years now, they've been bringing out a transparency report. And what I've got here is the contents page of their most recent transparency report, just to give you a flavor of how they are thinking about AI within their governing processes, within their risk assessment and management, mitigations. So that gives you a good understanding of how they're taking that issue very seriously, but obviously it is definitely within their wheelhouse too, which takes me to Sanofi. So Sanofi, it's a leading pharmaceutical company. And what they have done is they have come out and said that they want to integrate AI into their business. And so they have developed responsible AI guiding principles. They've established a governance process that's called RAISE. And this is underpinned by a set of principles that they've developed that talks to, these four pillars here. So fair and ethical and transparency and being robust and safe and eco-responsible. But I think what's really unique about Sanofi is also they've ensured that they've integrated responsible AI into their code of conduct. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to ensure that others within the business are aware of Sanofi's commitment to responsible AI. So that's my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Desiree. David, the floor is yours to start the whole governance aspect.
Okay, so my name's David Wakeling, and I'm a partner at A&O Sherman law firm, and we became the first law firm in the world to deploy generative AI across our business in 2022. And then we became the first law firm to start offering a SaaS AI product to clients via Contract Matrix, which we built in conjunction with Microsoft in 24. And then most recently in 2025, we've been building out agents with Harvey. And we've had to have a very acute focus on governance and risk management because we're a law firm, and you kind of expect your law firms to be very aware of the risks and very focused on risk management and good governance when deploying these kinds of systems. And so what I'm going to do is quickly give you a flavor of what the legal issues are pretty much anywhere in the world, wherever you're looking. And this is them in like headlines. If I start on the top left, you'll know about hallucinations probably, this idea that AI systems generally predict mathematically the most likely response to a question. They're trained on probably massive data sets, and when they respond, they can mishmash the data and make errors and what people call hallucinate. But crucially, they are also very unpredictable in their responses. They can be very unpredictable, so it's very difficult to audit them. And this is an issue of your regulated entity, for example. And finally, really, from a litigation risk perspective, quite scarily, you could get a very different answer to the same question, right? So if you imagine a consumer financial advisor might give different financial advice to one consumer 10 minutes after the other consumer, and that creates a direct delta in terms of the outcomes for those consumers, which is very exposing. If I look at the top right, Abderrahmane is going to pick up an EU AI Act in a minute, so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to mention briefly that there are specific AI laws and regulations, but most of those laws and regulations in virtually every industry sector are tech agnostic, and they still need to be applied. And tech is not an AI deployment is not a free pass to all of the rules and regulations and things that people need to worry about when deploying in any industry sector. And I'd also make the observation that the regulation of AI around the world is very fragmented. It is not the same way wherever you go. Obviously, the US is extremely pro developer, and the EU is on the opposite end of the spectrum. There's a lot of countries in between. So it creates a challenge for businesses when thinking about the compliance burden. Looking now to the bottom left, I just want to bring out the flavor of IP. There's a lot of copyright litigation going on around the world right now. And what people are suing on is issues around, first of all, how models are being built, what training data was scraped, was it lots of creative work by lots of artists kind of stuff. And that's copyright infringement in the training. We also have a lot of focus on the inputs when a business deploys an AI system as to whether or not those inputs are trade secrets and are protected. And if they're not, and if they're leaked, where does that leave them? So it's ownership of the inputs. And finally, there's also been some litigation around the world as to whether or not an AI system can itself create intellectual property. Can an AI system own IP? And there's a lot of nuance around the world in that respect as well. So copyright is one of the biggest flavors. Unsurprisingly, and consistent with the previous speakers, data privacy is a really big deal. So how people's personal data is processed and protection of individuals in a privacy context. Now here there are, maybe unsurprisingly, direct conflicts between some of the older laws like GDPR and what's happening in the AI tech space. So a couple of easy examples of that. If I look at the old GDPR, which you probably are a little bit too familiar with in your organizations, that has ideas like data minimization. And that principle of minimizing the data on individuals is in direct conflict with how AI systems are trained. That's about consuming as much data as possible and having the freedom to process it. And similarly, there are requirements in GDPR around accuracy. And again, organizations who are rolling out AI systems are seeing inaccuracies in how it speaks about personal, individuals. And so there's a direct conflict between that GDPR principle and AI deployment. So I'm going to pull up one last theme in this page before moving on, which is vendor lock-in, bottom right. And this is a big deal for deployers all over the world, because when they start rolling out AI systems, they are worried about becoming captive to a single AI provider. And as they bake more and more of their data, more and more of their intellectual property and their organizational knowledge into an AI system, they find they have vendor lock-in. And if that system becomes obsolete, they're kind of stuck, and it's very expensive to port your business 5 years down the road to a different provider. So portability to manage vendor lock-in has become a very significant AI risk and a governance issue. So broadly speaking, everything can be managed. All these risks can be managed by either defining a use case for deployment of an AI system and reinforcing it constantly so people are reminded what that use case was, which was agreed by the compliance folk on day one. It can be managed by operational controls. So think privacy enhancing technologies or InfoSec safeguards or limiting who's permissioned on a system. And it can be limited by lawyers, right? Using contractual frameworks in order to allocate copyright risk or to make sure the data is secure and so on. So broadly speaking, in good governance, we have a separation, and I'm not going to speak to all this, don't worry, but I am going to say it is very important when looking at AI systems that you separate what your thousands of users in your organization see as the rules and use, the guardrails. Don't use it to process CVs, don't use it to award bonuses because you're worried about discrimination. Very simple, soundbitey rules and use, which are easy to understand and run to a page long. And that is distinct to the right-hand side, which is AI use case deployment policy and everything to the right of that. That is separately the experts in the organization who onboard AI systems, and they make sure there is a clear position on data privacy, because you've got a data privacy officer who does that for a living. And there is a position on copyright infringement because you have a IP lawyer or another in-house lawyer who can manage that risk, and so on. The InfoSec is managed and all these other things. That is, it needs to be very clearly delineated, because otherwise you end up with an employee handbook that runs to 100 pages and no one reads, and they use the AI systems without the guardrails because they're too lengthy and they cover too much detail. So that separation has been important in the various clients we've advised. Again, on governance principles, I think there'll be pickup in this shortly as well, so I'll try to keep this brief. But fundamentally, most of the governance today is around keeping an expert in the loop, a human on the end of the AI system who is running the system and making sure it doesn't make errors and behaves itself and isn't biased. There is pressure on that with the implementation of autonomy. Agents as a buzzword of 25. By definition, that's about removing the expert in the loop. So we're going to see tensions in the governance techniques the last 2 years versus what's happening going forward. I'd also mention the number one for me is feedback. That concept of a feedback loop where the users in an organization have a structured way of giving back information on how a system's being deployed, where it's working and where it's failing, so that the central team can enhance the system, improve it and manage risk. That is the most important governance framework, I would say. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to the next speaker.
Abdelai, last but not least, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David and Erica. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to speak about one of the most important topic, which is how important it is to have a governance and how to implement it in order to not only take advantage of AI and its full potential, but also to cope with the latest piece of regulation, namely the EU AI Act. So my name is Abdelai Toudma. I'm partner at EY in charge of data protection, but also the AI governance. So I would start with an interesting element, which is how CEOs and decision makers, namely, are thinking about AI. And I think we have seen the rise of AI being translated in the investment and obviously the adoption by users. Since November 2022 and the rise of ChatGPT and other LLMs, there is obviously the two faces of the same coin. 2/3 mainly of the CEOs and decision makers are seeing AI in a very positive manner through the opportunity of improving the productivity, to improve the digitalization and of the relationship with the clients, and obviously they see the second phase. Because they are cautious about all the risks that this new technology is bringing, and I will elaborate a little bit further on this one. And by risk, we are thinking about cyber risks, we are thinking about supplier management and the way that AI is managing our data and private data. So why is it important to have a governance in place? So as such, AI is a technology like any others in the sense that you will be running third-party risks. Most of the company are not building themselves their own solutions. Some are acquiring, for instance, in the field of GenAI, some LLMs and configuring them to their own use. So they are running third-party risk or in, let's say, more specific technology risks. As part of the risks, namely the cyber risk is on the top tier of the raised one. And it's not really AI that is bringing this cyber risk. It's related to the way companies are addressing their identity and access management, but also the privilege access management. And finally, and I would echo what my colleagues have said earlier, data privacy. And I will also elaborate a little bit more on this central heart, because AI requires data. And at the heart of data strategy, you have the way you manage your privacy. Now, on top of that, and unfortunately for risk-averse profiles, you have specific and new risks that makes AI augmenting existing ones and bring new risks. It's the one related to the technology itself, or as such, the design risks, because you don't have the control of what is developed by suppliers. Most of the time, we're talking about a black box. And this is also cascaded in another type of risk related to machine learning and the inherent algorithmic risks. And finally, the performance, assuming that companies are measuring the performance before and after using AI. So in a nutshell, as you can see on the left side, it's important to raise those risks, to raise and increase the awareness about what is specific to AI, which is bringing a new set of risks. How can we, let's say, either improve our current posture when companies are already engaged into AI projects, or for companies and decision makers who didn't start this journey? Basically, it's important to start with basic questions, and I will not go through the 11 questions you can read here. This is, by the way, not an exhaustive list, but I would really insist on starting with the very basic. It's how you define AI and your AI strategy. What are you trying to fix? What revenue are you wanted to generate? Which burden do you want AI to carry? And it is important that you cascade those questions to business representative, as well as, of course, your staff. It is important to cascade those risks and those questions to your supplier. Do you have the right level of monitoring in terms of risk? Are you confident you have the right aspect, the right element of data. I mean, it could be, of course, data governance, data ownership, and you have cascaded this into your existing framework. So you can see that there are a list of questions. I put it here only the most relevant, but you can obviously adapt them to your context. Now, to close this first part of my presentation on the benefits of AI governance, and before jumping into more regulatory aspect, I think we can slice the topic into three elements. Regulation, we'll speak about it, and this piece of regulation called EU AI Act is here to help finding the right balance between innovation on one hand and safeguarding the fundamental EU citizen rights. Reputation, as we know, there are risks that are running. I think my colleagues mentioned hallucinations, just to give one of them, but of course, any type of data breach or misuse. And finally, realization, which is not only about risk, is how you will get the value that you have put into the project and the AI solution. Now, since August the 1st last year, there is the EU AI Act, which entered into force. As I said, it is not the first regulation, but it's the most advanced regulation in the world, which has a benefit, forcing everybody to ask the most important question: do I have listed all my solutions, and do we have an idea of the risks we are running? And therefore, you see a 14 level of risks, started by the unacceptable risk to the minimal or no risk. You can see also the examples. I'm not going to deep dive into the different examples, but by an unacceptable risk, we're talking about, for instance, social scoring. By high risk and limited risk, you'll see most of the solutions are currently falling into this category, at least the ones which are raising some risk, and that are the one related to essential private or public services, critical infrastructure, but also any component that might be considered in the chain of the client interaction. And finally, the last category, which is the minimal or no risk, and we have the example of spam filters. What is important in this slide is simply that you have to list, as I said, your AI solutions. And don't get me wrong, sometimes we have incredible answers. The company says, we have not started our journey, we don't have any AI solution. But when you ask them basic questions such as, are you using translation applications? Are you using screening applications, email mass mass mailing? The answer is yes. And when you check a little bit further, you see that they are containing AI components. So it's important to know what you are using as AI solution in order to then proceed with the next step, which is risk identification, risk scoring, and mitigation. The law itself, as I said, has entered into force 1st of August. The most important milestone, next milestone, will be the 2nd of August this year. So in a little bit more than 1 month. And the last milestone, as you can see, was 2nd of February. What is important to remember for that last date, that the first tiering, which consists in the AI solutions considered as prohibited because they are running unacceptable risks, this related article has entered into force. So any company which has these solutions in place is simply running a major risk to be fined. And by fines, we're talking about 35 million, so 7% of the general annual turnover, whichever is the highest. And the second element of 2nd February of 2025 is the AI literacy, which means that companies have to provide education to their staff and raise awareness around AI. And as you can see, the next milestones will be every year around 2nd of August for each tiering of solutions. This is, of course, subject to approval by the EU institution. 2 other slides, which are very important when it comes to the principle of robust and ethical AI. And this is what we've done at EY. EY has launched a strategic investment of 1.4 billion to develop AI for the use of the employees. So we have our own LLM, our large language model, which is used in a very protected environment to help users in their daily activities. And we have built this tool as part of a general AI platform by using the best practices and best guidelines before even the EU Act. And we have built our strategy around 9 pillars that you can see here, from explainability to data protection. And we strongly recommend to build your own strategy, to consider the most important values that Desiree has shared earlier in her very good presentation. You can, of course, adapt it because, for instance, fairness and transparency can be bundled. But given those principles, the next slides will logically come into what we strongly recommend when it comes to the mandate. There is an analogy that most of the experts are making around AI and the EU Act is the one comparing the EU Act with the GDPR, which entered into force in May 2018. But there are, of course, a lot of commonalities. Most of them are due to the fact that they're addressing data protection. It's a piece of law. It protects the EU citizen, okay? But the limits or the element of main difference is the fact that GDPR is the sole responsibility of data protection or whoever is in charge in the organization, because it could be under the risk, it could be under the legal/compliance department. Here, we're talking about a responsibility of a group of people encompassing business owners, of course, legal, compliance, IT, supplier management, and obviously whoever is in charge of cybersecurity. So we strongly recommend to have a cross-organizational setup in order to convey or in order to make sure you cover all the aspects of AI, from the ideation to the stop of any solution. Okay. One of our most requested most frequent question, I would say, is the path that we would recommend to our clients. It's basically to start, as I said in the beginning, by defining AI. There is an official definition in the EU Act, but I think it's important to have a definition that everybody can use within the company and in your context to make sure that you are able to jump on the next step, which is the education and the awareness around AI. Then the famous inventory of AI, believe me, there will be always surprises. 20 years back, we were talking about shadow IT. Now I think we can speak about shadow AI. And the most important activity to be carried on is regarding the risk management. So assess the risk by using the 4 tiering of the EU Act. Okay, make sure that you have the right governance in terms of roles and responsibilities, and address the data management, which is key. By data management, I mean, of course, making sure that you know where the data is coming from, that you have the proper ownership, the right classification, and most of those activities should be already there. It's not AI that will ask you to start a data management or data governance initiative. It's simply that AI, because it is bringing new risk, that is highlighting the need of ensuring such processes in terms of data management. And finally, it's key, and it's even requested by the EU Act, that you have the oversight on the whole life cycle. This is what is key. Don't take anything for granted. Make sure that the human is always managing AI. AI is here to augment us, not to replace us. And with that, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abdelhai. And that actually also brought us to the top of the hour. It's 5 o'clock sharp. So As we close, I'd like to extend a sincere thank you to our speakers, again, for generously sharing your time, expertise, and insights today. Your contributions have made this a truly valuable and thought-provoking session. Desiree, David, Abdelai, Alaric, thank you very much. A big thank you as well to all our attendees for your engagement and participation. As always, we invite you to stay connected and continue the dialogue, whether by sharing your reflections, reaching out with any follow-up questions, or joining us again for future events. You can follow us on social media, subscribe to our weekly newsletter, visit our website. We do have a dedicated AI webpage, which is worth a visit, and for any updates on upcoming events and additional resources. Thank you again for being with us today. We look forward to welcoming you to our next webinar. Until then, take care and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.